Good day, everyone.
And my name is Angela Mae Niebre.
I'm Arniel Culanag.
And I am Mr. Arniel Culanag.
And we are here to discuss gestures and sign language.
Okay, so let's kick off our discussions with gestures. Gestures is a form of non-verbal communication and defined as a movement of our hand and the head to express idea or meanings. Furthermore, it can also be used to emphasize an idea, a sentiment, or attitude. Gestures was considered a universal language in the western part of our world during the 17th century. Although studies suggest that manual gestures was born and taught by the scholar who evolved as a Homo sapiens. Manual gestures was possibly considered as the root of all language. This was written by the gestural theory by the philosopher and the priest, Abbé de Gortela.
According to David McNear, there are 4 types of gestures. First one is iconic gestures. Iconic gestures is defined as movements of the hands and arms and oftenly used for describing object attributes. It is seen to be a reflection of the meaning of what is said. For instance, we make a shape of a box. Meanwhile, dialects are a common group of gestures that means pointing. This can easily be seen with children that extend their index finger or any body part to single out an object of interest. The third one is beat gesture. Beat gesture is described as short, quick movement of hands and fingers while talking or doing rhythm. This type of gesture is used to emphasize parts of what is being said or to mark a change from describing events in a story to commenting on those events. Lastly, the metamorphic gestures. These gestures put an abstract idea into more literal just to form a concrete form. An example is making a heart shape and placing it into the chest to indicate affection or love to someone.
In addition, according to Peter A. Anderson, there are 3 types of gestures. These are adapters, emblems, and illustrators. First, let's talk about adapters gestures. Adapter gesture are touching behavior and movement that indicates internal state typically related to arousal or anxiety. It can be targeted towards the self, objects, or others. This can also include movements to that improves comfort, to reduce stress. Example of adapter gestures include subconsciously clicking of pens and shaking of legs during classes. Let's talk about emblems gestures. Emblems gestures are specific gestures with specific meaning and consciously used and consciously understood. These are also used to substitute for words. But there is still different from the signs used by hearing impaired people or others. A raised thumbs up is an example of emblems gestures that means okay. Same is true with circling the index finger at the side of the head, signifying craziness. Okay, let's move on to illustrators gestures. These are the most common type of gestures and are used to illustrate the verbal message they accompany. Unlike emblems, illustrators do not use typically meanings on their own and are used to subconsciously than emblems. These are largely involuntarily and natural gestures flow from us when we speak. The most common type of these are the hand gestures that we make that indicate size or shape of an object.
Moving on with sign languages. Sign languages are languages that use the visual manual modality to convey meaning. It is also a system of communication using visual gestures and signs that are usually used by hearing impaired people. It is expressed through manual articulations in combination with manual elements. Just like gestures, sign language in Western societies starts in the 17th century. It was used as visual language or method of communication. But during those days, they just commonly used mimic, hand signs, and finger spelling. There are 2 general categories of sign language, namely alternative sign language and primary sign language. When we talk about alternative sign language, It refers to a system of hand signals developed by speakers for limited communication, where speech cannot be used. These signals are also described as gestural communication to make it clear that they are not the same as languages. We may often use this when we encounter foreigners that doesn't speak any of our official languages. In contrast, primary sign language is the first language of a group of people who do not use a spoken language with each other. Primary sign language is the main way of deaf and mute people to communicate. Examples of these are the British Sign Language or BSL, French Sign Language or FSL, and American Sign Language or ASL. ASL was a sort of gestured version of English. Now, let us talk about the structures of sign languages. There are 5 key aspects of visual information. First one is shape and orientation. Shape depends on the finger, while orientation depends on the palm. For example, to describe the articulation of thank you in ASL, we start with the shape of the hands used in forming the sign. We use a flat hand in articulating this. The orientation of the hand is palm up rather than palm down. Location refers to where the finger and palm pointed or located while doing the sign language. Each sign has a location in relation to the head and the body of the sign. In thank you, the sign begins near the mouth and is completed in the chest area. Movement may depend on how fast or slow the interpretation is. Every movement of signs has a meaning. The movement element in thank you is out and downward towards the receiver. The difference in movement creates a difference in meaning. Primes is the contrasting elements within these 4 general features. Facial expressions are also used by signers to add a corresponding meaning to the signs. These are important functions served by non-manual components such as head movement, eye movement, and several specific types of facial expressions. Thank you is articulated with a head nod and a smiling face. Meanwhile, signers can also use finger spelling, which is a system of hand configuration used to represent letters of the alphabet. Now that we've discussed the gestures and sign languages, let us talk about their differences. First, gesture is uninstructed, while sign language have specific patterns and specific movements. We may be using gestures unconsciously, but sign language follows certain articulation and requires specific knowledge to execute it. Gestures has no specific movements and no specific patterns, while sign language is systematic. You can use gestures any way you like, but not sign language because it follows the American Sign Language or ASL. And lastly, gestures can be performed in any order, while sign language drives out gestures.